The town of Silver Creek, Oregon, was a portrait of suburban tranquility, a place of perfectly manicured lawns and identical houses bound by white picket fences. It was a town that believed in its own quiet perfection. But on a rain-drenched Tuesday in October, the portrait began to rot from the edges in. 6-year-old Georgie Denbrough, a flash of brilliant yellow in his raincoat, was in a state of pure joy. He was chasing the paper boat his older brother Bill had meticulously crafted for him. Bill, homebound with a nasty flu, had spent the morning carefully sealing every crease of the boat with a thick layer of paraffin wax, an older brother's solemn promise that it would not sink. The boat, a fragile speck of white against the churning, muddy gutter water, sailed gallantly down the street. It was winning the race. Georgie ran, his rubber boots slapping a gleeful rhythm on the wet pavement, but the current was merciless. At the intersection of Jackson and Witcham, it swerved violently and plunged into the gaping black maw of a storm drain. "Oh no!" he cried out, his voice small against the drumming rain. He fell to his knees, the rough asphalt pressing into his jeans, and peered into the darkness. It was a darkness that smelled of more than just rain and rotting leaves. There was an ancient, cloying scent, like damp earth and forgotten things. An unnatural cold seemed to breathe from the opening. "Lost something, Georgie?" a voice echoed from within. It was a peculiar voice, impossibly cheerful, like a cartoon character or a 1950s television host. But beneath the saccharine surface was a wet, gravelly undertone, a resonance that seemed to vibrate in Georgie's bones. A shape began to resolve itself in the gloom, a pale oval floating in the black. It was a face, a clown's face. Not the kind from the circus, but something pulled from a half-forgotten nightmare. It was clad in a silver silk suit that seemed to shimmer even in the darkness, with 2 bouffant tufts of orange hair on either side of its bald head. A perfect ruby-red smile was painted onto its stark white face. "I'm Pennywise, the dancing clown," it said, and produced Georgie's boat, miraculously dry. "Quite a storm, eh? But down here, we have a whole carnival. Popcorn, hot dogs, cotton candy, and balloons, Georgie. Oh, we have all the balloons you can imagine." It paused, its head tilting. "When you're down here with me, you'll float too." Georgie, mesmerized and frightened, remembered his mother's warnings about strangers. I should get going," he stammered. "My brother—" "Your brother?" Pennywise's smile seemed to widen. It tilted its head again, and a dry, unsettling crack echoed from its neck, like twigs snapping. "Oh, you mean the Billy Boy? I know all about him. He wouldn't want you to lose your boat, would he? He's at home, sick, because of you." The clown's smile stretched impossibly wide, peeling back from its gums to reveal teeth that were anything but human. They were rows upon rows of needle-sharp yellow fangs, like a shark's. In that instant, its bright blue, friendly eyes dissolved into 2 deep pits of molten orange, ancient and burning with a malevolent intelligence. "Take it, Georgie." As the small boy reached his arm into the drain, the clown's white-gloved hand shot out. It didn't just grab him, it clamped down like a steel trap. Georgie felt a blinding, tearing agony as his arm was violently wrenched from its socket. The sound wasn't a simple snap, but a wet, tearing crunch of bone and sinew. For a moment, there was only shocked silence. Then, before a scream could even form in his throat, he was pulled into the impossible, suffocating darkness of the sewer. The clown's deranged, cackling laughter the last sound to echo in the storm. The summer of that year baked Silver Creek under an oppressive, hazy sun. An unspoken curfew had descended with the heat. Children were vanishing. First Georgie, then a few others. The adults, however, seemed trapped in a strange collective denial. They spoke in hushed tones, drew their blinds earlier, but never acknowledged the predatory shadow that had fallen over their town. Their apathy was a horror of its own. It was in this suffocating atmosphere that the Losers Club was forged. They were the town's untouchables, the kids who were either ignored or tormented. They were the primary targets of Henry Bowers, a teenage bully whose cruelty was a reflection of the town's hidden sickness. Stuttering Bill Denbrough led their unofficial pack, his grief over Georgie a constant, heavy cloak, his guilt the engine of his obsession. Ben Hanscom was the overweight new kid who found solace not with people, but in the library, burying himself in the grim, bloody history of his new home. Eddie Kasprek was a fragile hypochondriac, his world a minefield of potential diseases, his fears meticulously cultivated by an overbearing mother. His inhaler was less a medical device and more a talisman against a hostile world. And then there was Beverly Marsh, the only girl, a resourceful and defiant spirit trapped between the leering rumors at school and the far more tangible threat of her father at home. They found their sanctuary in a wild, overgrown stretch of land they called the Barrens. There, amidst the buzzing insects and the sluggish creek, they were not outcasts, they were a tribe. They built a dam, a small feat of engineering that felt like a monumental victory. They pooled their money for cheap snacks, and, reluctantly at first, then with a growing sense of desperate urgency, they shared their secrets. They were all being haunted. And they were all being haunted
the entity
by
that
the same
wore a clown's
impossible
face,
thing.
began a meticulous campaign of psychological warfare, tailoring its attacks to the unique architecture of their deepest fears. For Eddie, it became a living embodiment of his hypochondria. As he walked past the rotting, derelict house at 29 Nabald Street, a figure shambled out from the porch. It was a leper, a walking corpse whose skin wept and sloughed off in greasy sheets. When it opened its mouth to speak, a wet, rattling cough shook its frame, and a shower of gray tissue splattered onto the weeds. It reached out a decaying hand, its finger joints bent at gruesome, unnatural angles, and whispered in a voice thick with phlegm, "Come play with me, Eddie. I've got a treat for you, something you can catch." After Eddie fled, a psychosomatic rash bloomed across his arms, a phantom sickness that his mother took as proof of his inherent fragility. For Ben, it twisted his only refuge, the library, into a place of terror. He was alone in the history section when he saw a single red balloon tied to a bookshelf. As he stared, a sepia-toned photograph of the Silver Creek Ironworks explosion of 1908 began to move. The image of a child miner decapitated in the blast slowly turned its head. The headless body then began to climb out of the photograph, its movements jerky and unnatural. The disembodied head floated after it, leaving a trail of black, viscous blood in the air, its eyes fixed on Ben. He never felt safe in the library again. For Bill, its torment was relentless and deeply personal. The photo album in Georgie's room would flip open on its own, showing pictures of his dead brother. In one, Georgie's eye would wink. In another, blood would begin to pool on the page, dripping onto the floor with a thick, syrupy sound. At night, Georgie's voice would gurgle up from the drains in the bathroom, a distorted, hateful whisper carried on the scent of sewer gas and decay. "You sent me out to die, Billy. You're next. We'll all float down here." The stress caused Bill's stutter to become nearly unmanageable. Beverly's ordeal was a waking nightmare of violation and secrecy. The voices of the dead children whispered to her from her bathroom sink drain, their pleas for help mixing with the sound of dripping water. Then, a geyser of thick, rust-colored blood exploded from the drain. It wasn't just a flood, it was alive. It coated every surface, and within the gore, screaming faces formed, and tiny, desperate hands clawed at the porcelain. The horror was compounded by the terror of her father discovering it. She scrubbed for hours, her knuckles raw, but the coppery stench of it lingered in the air for days, a smell that only she, and later her friends, could perceive. It was Ben who became their historian, their reluctant chronicler of evil. He realized the hauntings weren't random acts of a ghost. They were the calculated attacks of a predator. He spent the summer hunched over microfiche readers and dusty town ledgers, connecting threads of darkness that stretched back centuries. He discovered the horrifying pattern. Silver Creek's peace was a lie, a fallow period between feeding cycles. Every 25 years, the town would erupt in a storm of violence and disappearances, only to fall quiet again, shrouded in amnesia. He found records of it all. A series of unsolved child murders in 1962, the burning of a black-owned speakeasy in 1935, an act of racial hatred that claimed dozens of lives. The ironworks explosion in 1908 that killed 102 people, 88 of them children. Each event was punctuated by eyewitness accounts of a strange clown or fleeting glimpses of impossible creatures. It had been here since the beginning, sleeping and waking, feasting and growing fat on the town's fear and pain. The adults' apathy wasn't a choice. It was a symptom of the town's deep-seated infection, a psychic venom that ensured the flock never saw the wolf that lived among them.
"It wants us to be afraid," Bill announced to the group, his voice cutting through the summer haze with newfound clarity. "That's how it wins. It's time we stop being afraid." It was a desperate, childish plan, born of a terrifying logic. If the monster lived underground, they would go underground to kill it. They mapped the labyrinthine sewer system, determining that the heart of the network lay directly beneath the cursed house on Neibolt Street. Armed with silver slugs forged from a melted-down piggy bank, an inhaler filled with what Eddie was convinced was battery acid, and their fierce, fragile bond, the 7 of them descended into the stinking darkness. The sewers were a different world, a foul-smelling maze of claustrophobic tunnels and rushing water. The air was thick with the stench of waste and something else, the sweet, musky odor of the predator's den. They heard whispers in the echoes and saw fleeting shapes in the periphery of their flashlight beams. Finally, they reached the lair. It was a vast, circular cistern, its ceiling lost in darkness, and in the center, a horrifying spectacle. The bodies of the missing children, dozens of them, were floating in the stagnant air like grotesque balloons. Their clothes were from different decades, their bodies in varying states of decay. In the middle of this morbid mobile, Pennywise sat atop a mountain of discarded circus props and children's belongings, leisurely chewing on a child's arm. It saw them and its smile widened. "Well, well," it boomed, its voice echoing in the vast space. "Look what the storm washed in. The lambs have wandered right into the butcher's shop." And then its form began to shift and blur, melting into a chaotic montage of their fears. A werewolf with razor claws, a giant spider with Beverly's father's eyes, a swirling vortex of orange light that seemed to pull at their sanity. The final battle had begun. The fight was a maelstrom of terror and defiance, but for the first time they fought back as one. Beverly, using her slingshot, fired a silver slug that struck the werewolf's eye, causing it to howl in genuine pain. Eddie sprayed his inhaler at the leper's face, and the power of his belief made it shriek and recoil as if burned by acid. Bill stood his ground against the phantom of Georgie, screaming, "You're not him! You're not my brother!" Their collective courage, their refusal to be victims, acted like a poison. For the first time in its ancient existence, the entity felt something other than hunger and hate. It felt pain, and it felt fear. They didn't kill it, but they wounded it. They broke its hold on their minds and inflicted a wound so deep that it was forced to retreat, slithering back into the deep, dark places of the earth to begin its long hibernation ahead of schedule. When the losers finally stumbled out of the sewers, covered in filth, blood, and the psychic residue of the battle, they knew they had only won a temporary reprieve. They gathered in the barrens as the sun began to set on their terrible summer. Bill found a sharp piece of a Coke bottle and, with grim determination, drew it across each of their palms. They stood in a circle, their small hands clasped together, their blood mingling in a silent, solemn pact. "If it's not dead," Bill said, his stutter completely gone, "it will come back in 27 years, and so will we." He looked at each of them, his eyes old with a knowledge no child should possess. "Swear it. Swear that if it comes back, we'll come back and finish this. No matter where we are, no matter what we're doing." One by one, they swore the oath. A promise sealed in blood and trauma. They had survived the monster, but they had buried their childhood in that dark, stinking sewer. Soon they would grow up and leave Silver Creek, but they knew, with a certainty that would haunt their dreams for years to come, that the town and its monster would never truly leave them.